Hey everyone, Carl Blair with Aviation Careers Podcast, and today we answer the question, what is furlough, and more importantly, what is recall? You know, because of the certain trying times here, a lot of people have been starting to get furloughed and possibly taking leaves of absence. So I want to go over what a furlough is. By the way, in the show notes, I'll have a link to a podcast that I did that explains all about furlough and, more importantly, what a recall is. And of course, if you want to learn more, go to aviationcareerspodcast.com and go to our coaching page if you need some personal assistance as far as getting through this whole period as far as a furlough is concerned. We're keeping our prices the same until this furlough is all done. It might be a few years for some people to get recalled. But it's started. So let's get started with what is a furlough, and more importantly, what is a recall? Well, a furlough is basically a leave of absence, but it's an involuntary leave of absence as far as the context in an airline job, whether it's a pilot, mechanic, a flight attendant. So that's what a furlough is a leave of absence that's involuntary. And the reason they do this is that they want to be able to recall that workforce, and it's also in people's contracts as far as furlough is concerned. But more important than furlough is what is a recall. Furlough and recall is usually the section within the contracts, in these labor contracts with the flight attendants, pilots, mechanics, etc. that work out there on the front lines. And what this does is it enables you to have recall rights back. What does that mean? That means that after they furlough people and now they need more workers to come back, pilots, etc., then they start recalling you based on the contract and what it says in your contract. So most importantly is to read whatever contract you have, whatever employment and contract you have with your company. So a furlough, this is how it works. First of all, before any furlough happens, the first thing companies do is they ask people for leaves of absence. They call them COLA. It's a little bit different than Pepsi Cola or Coca-Cola, but it's actually a company offered leave of absence so they can mitigate the furloughs. And first I'll ask people, hey, do you want to take some time off? Maybe it's a 1 month, a 3 month, a 6 month, a 12 month. There's many different things that happen during this leave of absence. Possibly you'll get paid during that leave of absence. You possibly will keep your benefits, your medical benefits. Many times, most of the time, you actually still get your travel benefits. So they offer leaves of absence. They also offer people reduced flying lines, meaning that you'll actually reduce the number of hours because most contracts guarantee you a certain number of hours every month to fly. That's another thing they'll do to try to mitigate the furloughs. And then the other thing they'll do is start doing early retirements, offering people early retirements. Say, you know, the mandatory retirement age is 65. They may go to 64, 63, 62, 61, whatever it is. First, they're going to start there. Then, if they don't have enough pilots that volunteer for leaves of absence, that want to do reduced flying lines, or that want to do an early retirement, the next thing they have to do is do a furlough. And by the way, the reason that doing these different flying lines that are reduced is good for the company is because it becomes a scalable workforce. Because remember, with an airline pilot, a flight attendant, mechanic, you have to be current, you have to be trained to go fly. So this enables people to actually keep flying, keep current, so that say things turn around, they'll be able to cancel those reduced flying lines and right away have this workforce out there ready to go. Remember, after about 6 months or so, that's about the cutoff for most pilots staying current, etc. And that's where for the company, it's not quite as beneficial for them to go beyond the 6 months as far as reduced flying lines. Then they'll start getting into what's called furloughs. The way a furlough works is this. First, they start. It's at the bottom. It goes in reverse seniority order. So the last in is the first person out. So if you're at the bottom of the list, you're probably going to get furloughed right away. Normal furloughs take about 10% to 20% of the pilot workforce. And you've heard me on the podcast talk about how that 10% at a larger airline, like we've used some examples of certain airlines, could wipe out a couple of years of actual hiring at that airline. And we've done the numbers, and those are in past episodes. But this is how, again, that works. They take off from the bottom and they furlough people. And during that furlough, you can collect unemployment. A lot of people make mistakes, though, during that furlough. And this is what I want you to avoid. And that is, during the furlough, say you decide to change the state that you actually live in, which a lot of people do. Remember, your unemployment benefits will be coming from that state. Certain training benefits that you may have had in that state may be gone because you switched states. I'm a good example of doing the wrong thing. I switched states after I got furloughed, and the state that I was in actually, previous to the furlough, actually offered training benefits, so I could actually get a type rating in an aircraft, possibly get another job. When I moved states, they said no, that was ineligible for that. So I had to fight for quite some time. By the time I was able to fight that, I was actually recalled. Another thing too is on the recall, it's really important to understand that fact. So you furlough first from the bottom, you get a letter, you get unemployment benefits, you might get a little bit of pay during that period. They might pay out your vacation, your time off, whatever that may be when you first get furloughed. So afterwards, you go on unemployment. You'll keep in touch with the people at your company, because recall means this: that is your right to be recalled as a pilot, and that goes in seniority order. So if you are furloughed down the bottom, the person that's last furloughed is the first one that's back in. So the first person furloughed is the one that's going to stay on furlough for the longest time, the most junior person. That's the way it is with airlines. Everything is in seniority order. So the recall rights that you have are incredibly important. You need to read that within your employment contract, within your union contract, as far as what are your recall rights, how long do you have recall rights while you're on furlough. Hopefully you have a good contract and you have recall rights until you turn 65. So some people stay on furlough for many, many years, because during the furlough process, some pilots go out and get other jobs, and that happens. So make sure in your furlough clause that if the recall rights are spelled out, and if you decide to go work somewhere else, that you actually have time to come back to your regular pilot job. Another thing on recall, so this is what they do during recall. They'll go in seniority order. So now you were the last person to get furloughed, and you really don't want to go back to work right away, because you have this great flying job that you found. And you can decide to do something which we call bypass recall. Bypass recall. Bypass recall means that you don't want to come to work until they go back through the seniority list again and get back to your number. So what they're going to do is send you a letter, say you have usually about 2 weeks to respond to that letter, usually about 2 weeks, and again, this is based on your contract, to show up for work. So in other words, they'll send out a letter to you, say, hey, listen, you've been recalled, make up your mind, do you want to bypass this recall, or do you want to come back to work? Many people bypass a recall. So you send a letter and say, hey, listen, I'm going to bypass recall. You call them on the phone, just make sure they got that letter. And then they go to the next person on the list. Say, hey, do you want to be recalled, or do you want to stay on furlough? Once they get to the bottom of the list, okay, then the recall rights, depending again on your contract, they go back up through the list and say, hey, listen, this is your last chance. You will be recalled. If you do not get recalled now, you give up your recall rights. Very important point. You give up your recall rights. Many people have stayed on furlough and given up their recall rights, or they've bypassed furlough for a long time. It depends on your contract what happens here. Traditionally, though, this is what happens. They go through the list and they ask people if they want to come back. When they get to the bottom of the list, they start back up the list again and say, okay, this is your last chance. You have to come back to work. And if you say yes, then you go back to work. Some different recall rights work different than that. So again, you got to look at your contract and figure out which way it goes through the seniority list, because this does change from company to company. So your furlough and your recall are very important things. And then once you get recalled, they go back through the training process, and some people have to start over because they've been gone for so long, and some people just have to do a quick recurrence. Say you were furloughed for 3 months, you may just have to do some landings. 6 months, you may have to go through a much more rigorous training program. Maybe it's a couple years, you have to go through the full training program. That happened to me while I was on furlough, but most importantly though, another mistake I don't want you to make is, if you're furloughed, is to stop flying. Don't stop flying. Keep yourself current somehow, maybe in a simulator, etc. Because remember, as an airline pilot, we're flying IFR. I want you to keep your instrument skills sharp, because this is what happens on a recall, and I've seen this very often. And I forgot to mention in the beginning, I was a furlough rep for United Express for quite some time, from 2001 till 2013. And one thing I saw is people coming back from furlough that actually did not make it through training because they didn't keep current as a pilot. Maybe they got a job doing something else and they didn't get sharp again flying again. So you want to become proficient in flying again before you come back to training, because the airline is not responsible for training you as a pilot. You already are a pilot, and you have to be current. I know it's a tough time to do that, but anyway, that's what a furlough is. That's what a recall is. I have a deeper dive in my podcast as far as what a furlough and recall is. There's a lot of information here, but again, a furlough is a leave of absence that's involuntary. Part of that furlough, and the most important part, is your recall rights, that you're recalled to work. That's a really important point. Make sure you read your contract, you read your employment contract, and see what your furlough and recall rights are. You look into your unemployment rights in the state that you're living right now. You claim it as your residency before you moved to see if you can get certain benefits during this furlough and during this downtime. If you need any help, of course, don't forget to go to aviationcareerspodcast.com. We have the career coaching to help you get through this trying time, and we also have that scholarships guide. I mean, this is a time that would be great to actually further some ratings, etc. And in that scholarships guide, you can find additional ratings, your instrument, maybe a seaplane rating, etc. That sure will keep you current, and that's really, really important. And look for some of our other courses there at Aviation Careers Podcast. But the most important thing I want you to do, if you're facing facing furlough, plan for your furlough. Plan what you're going to do during furlough. Hopefully you've planned before this and you've saved up some money. But if you're also looking at the recall rights, the other side, I know someday you're going to get recalled. Right now you're just worried about where you're going to get your money and all. Look at the recall rights. Make sure you know what they are. And then what I want you to do is this. I want you to keep moving forward in your career. Keep doing something to move forward in your career, to keep current in your flying. If you're a major airline pilot, it may be applying to a regional airline. If you're a regional airline pilot, you may be going back to flight instructor, manor towing, or something. Get on a simulator. Do something to keep moving forward in your life, in your flying life, and your career. Most importantly, take care of your family and make sure you keep flying. But do something today to keep moving forward in your career and in your flying life. Well, hopefully this has been helpful. Don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell so you get notified as to further videos here on our YouTube channel at Expert Aviator. It's been a great talking to you. Keep your chin up. Keep a positive attitude. I know we're all going to get through this together, but again, do something today to move forward in your life and your career. We'll talk to you next episode. This has been Carl Valeri.